Okay, we're going to start now, and some more people will be joining us, and they'll just pick up where we are when they arrive. So welcome, everybody. We are back to the Business of Family webinar. We took a little break, and we're back here in 2022 after a fun holiday season. It's been an interesting time. You know, we have all once again redefined the way that we're working. There's a lot of companies that have decided to go back indoors and not be in the office quite yet. And the landscape is constantly changing. But we're here and happy to join you so that we can talk about various strategies for enterprising families, families who are running businesses, family offices, and individuals who have unique issues that are confronting them both on the family side, the finance side, and the enterprise side. We bring together various speakers who can speak about fiduciary issues and family issues and what it means to help ultra high net worth families through some of these very difficult and challenging issues, as well as the joys. Today, our presentation is on redefining the way that we work, you know, and here we are once again dealing with going back indoors because of a new variant on the virus. We initially thought this was going to be a pause in March of 2020. We went indoors, we came back out during the vaccination days, and we seem to be wondering how we're going to redefine things now that we have a majority of people vaccinated, but there are still some concerns, and the infection rate at this time during this presentation happens to be climbing. So we've been feeling different reverberations, and we've been assisting our clients through many different changes and many pivots and configurations. At this point, what we are all experiencing is a happiness that we can bring technology together to advise our clients and to advise the families that we work with. I think we all feel more comfortable with the technology. But now we are looking for ever more engagement and connection through that, because now we have been in this situation on the long term, and we're part in, part out. There's been many silver linings, many been incredibly successful for our clients, but at this point we're looking for engagement and connection. And for that reason, we are bringing together a group of people who have been working with families for many years, and I'm delighted to announce who we have with us today. We have Doug Baumoel. Doug is the founder of Continuity Family Business Consulting, where he and his team have helped family businesses and family offices plan for succession, develop governments, and manage conflict for almost 20 years. Continuity's mission is to ensure that families enjoy what they have, know where they're going, and make the most of their lives together. Nicole Bailey is a lead client advisor for Fortis Management Group. It's a boutique, fee-only multifamily office that works with complex, ultra-high net worth families. As an expert, generalist, and trusted advisor, Nicole sits on the same side of the table as her clients so they can make the most informed financial decisions for their lives and for their legacy. Having previously built out and managed a single-family office, Nicole has been deeply involved in bridging the gap between personal and business implications while collaborating with key technical advisors. Samantha Denning is a professional coach, mediator, and facilitator. She provides customized support and solutions to a wide range of diverse and influential individuals and families. With her assistance and guidance, clients have been able to successfully navigate complex challenges and circumstances, both personal and professional, while increasing their capacity to lead with greater impact and influence. And I am your regular host, Lisa Cukier. I'm an attorney with Burns & Levinson. We are a full-service firm. We handle corporate and finance, business litigation, intellectual property, real estate, and my practice areas include family law, fiduciary litigation, fiduciary protection of families and family wealth. I handle not only divorce and prenuptial planning and estate litigation and trust litigation, but we handle trust and estate planning and planning for incapacity and protection of families from various impacts that might happen due to mental health issues or diminished capacity from aging and other different issues that might come up right at critical junctures, such as business succession. And with that, I am going to turn it right over to Samantha Denning, who's going to lead us and moderate for today's webinar. Samantha.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone today, everyone online, and this delightful panel who I have the pleasure of knowing for some years now. Time flies. I'm excited to lead us through a really meaningful discussion around some key topics. And for those of you listening, we're going to run through some things today in swift-ish form. And if there are areas where someone on the call can be of greater service to you, or you want to have a more depthful conversation, we encourage you just to write that down and reach out. And we really want this to be supportive to you in whatever way is helpful. And we understand that there's many unique cases where some, time one-on-one may be helpful to really navigate some of those dialogues a little bit more in depth. But kind of to kick us off, the past 2 years have been undoubtedly an environment for introspection. And so maybe you could each start by just sharing, what are the most prevalent changes you've seen across your clients and how they've adapted to this environment. Nicole, I'll pass it off to you to kick us off.
Sure. So I would say both from a prospect and a client standpoint, there's been a very significant fear of mortality, which is upsetting to see. As an advisor, you always want to see your clients happy. But, reflecting on a recent conversation with a prospect who unfortunately lost their father due to COVID, mother was impacted by it. And unfortunately, they don't think will ever be the same. And so I think for that particular individual, there was a significant moment where I think he looked at his family dynamics and situations and realized, as the wealth creator and the person really driving the train, the rest of my family doesn't have any clue the magnitude or wealth of the complexity, and also recognize that he really needed to bring in the right people and resource appropriately to be able to better service his family into the future. So I think it's really proper resourcing, recognition of complexity that really exists in these affluent clients' lives, and then the need to help managing it now, but not only now, into the future and for future generations, and getting those other individuals and their family the support they need. A lot of time, energy, and attention spent on, I think, critical planning objectives and allowing all voices to be heard around the table. So really reassessing what matters. And I can reflect on a conversation where G2 really wanted a deeper understanding of the trust created by their parents and the power of appointment controls available to them that they could utilize within their parents' estates. So they had more control over how G3 utilized the wealth and whether they wanted to expose them to the panel of different fiduciaries that they would have to deal with to access that wealth into the future, and whether that was appropriate for their children or not. So I think, there's just many situations that have occurred that really leads to preservation of life, health, and happiness for our clients, and really not wanting to let go of that, considering all that we've had to experience.
Yeah, I think that, as you said, resourcing and having the right resources to create what it sounds like, what I heard him come in a term of maybe some stress or chaos and leave with a bit more ease, which I know is something that's deeply meaningful to the way that you work. And I've always appreciated that in your approach. Doug, how about for you? What have been some things you've noticed?
Well, for the families I work with, time has sort of slowed down for many of them during this pandemic. The pace of business has slowed down. Families have had time to see the bigger picture and to pay attention to it and not get lost in sort of that daily minutia that used to drive the days before the pandemic. So not only have families responded to the pandemic by prioritizing the organization of their estates because of that mortality, that realization of mortality that Nicole was talking about, but they've also responded by trying to get their relationships in better shape as well. They're focusing on longer term complex issues like leadership and ownership succession for their businesses. And that's really the heavy lifting for the work I do with family businesses. And the embrace of video has certainly supported this new focus. The stress of COVID and lockdowns have brought many families together, but they've also separated many families. The political polarization of the last couple of years has led to the vaccine and mask polarization within some families that we're seeing. And when we started talking about this presentation, four of us, we sort of thought that COVID was in the rearview mirror, and that's certainly not the case. Omicron has sort of delayed that. But I think families are beginning to feel that there's light at the end of this pandemic tunnel. And so families that have experienced conflict and disagreement, they're trying to get their relationships back to order. And I get the sense from the families that I work with that there's a new appreciation for the importance of that family bond, or what we call the family factor. For example, they look forward now to connecting socially in this time of isolation. And in addition, there's this great resignation that's happening, and it's affected not only the unemployment figures, but the family businesses I work with as well. Next gens are questioning, like never before, their career choices, and that's sort of been a catalyst for decision making around either entering or exiting the family business.
Yeah. And it sounds like, Doug, for you, it's really kind of being that translator and bridge and facilitator of those really meaningful conversations and offering different kinds of structures or approaches to either having dialogue or potentially offering different opportunity or allowing people space to speak about what kind of trajectory they want to have. Yeah. Lisa, how about for you?
So, it's really changed. It's changed dramatically. Initially, when back in March of 2020, there was an incredible rush to do estate planning for the very reasons that we're all discussing. As Nicole said, there was a sense of mortality. But at the same time, back around that time, people didn't think about family planning. That just became a wing and a prayer. There were a lot of marriages that happened very quickly without prenuptial agreements. But ultimately, with time, over the past year, that has changed, and the family planning has become extraordinary. The estate planning has become extraordinary. The business succession planning, extraordinary. I have seen such an uptick in this. I have never been busier in my work. And what I'm seeing also is a flurry of case law coming out of the Massachusetts courts that are interpreting the stability of a trust and the vulnerability of a trust, the immunization of trusts from impacts such as divorce. And so that has been such a significant trend. We've seen both cases relating to long-term alimony and cases relating to the vulnerability of trusts. We've seen more decanting than ever before. One of the most noteworthy cases that I think I've handled over the past 2 years was a matter where I was asked to do some prenuptial planning for a young person from a family of significant wealth. And in connection with that, I took a look at the family's trusts, many, many trusts that had been executed over the course of many years. And they had different marital exclusion language in them. And I needed to look at the trusts in connection with the prenuptial planning to make sure that I could really protect those family trusts that held quite significant wealth. And in dealing with the prenuptial planning, I made the recommendation to do some decanting. And we literally decanted assets out of some old trusts into some new trusts, and then did the prenuptial planning to make sure that the entire family was protected. And so that was a very noteworthy pandemic adaptation to real life.
Yeah. Lisa, I will say that is something that you're very thoughtful about, is really taking a very like zooming out in the right way, looking at all the things, then figuring out what the right structure and approach is to really take care of people and their assets well. So you're exceptionally thoughtful about that. And kind of looking at impact and then, reprioritization, reallocation, what are some of the priorities that you're seeing within your clients' lives, personally or professionally? Like what's of top priority for them right now? Doug, maybe you could start us off with what
Sure.
you're starting to notice.
That's some of the things that we're seeing. Well, it's driven, I think, by video communication being so much more widely accepted. It's becoming so much easier for families to coordinate and schedule meetings. And with that added efficiency, they have the time to work on family organizational and educational issues. We've had many families schedule quarterly or even more frequent educational sessions on a variety of issues. And because nobody has to get on a plane anymore, these meetings are very well attended. So that's been a change. Sorry, go ahead.
Could you name a couple of the topics that you would be having some of those educational opportunities on?
Sure. We generally give presentations on family governance, family councils, their purpose, their construction, family conflict. We give a wonderful family conflict management presentation that's based on our book, Deconstructing Conflict, that helps families start speaking with a different language about the things that separate them. And then basic family business succession and other issues. But if you think back when this video revolution sort of happened with our client families, there were a lot of initial fears of privacy and security and hacking. And I think that's sort of gone. Families are now set up and ready for video. It's second nature to them. And like I said before, they're using it socially. They're using it without the advisors. So they're ready. We're also seeing that families are much more interested in these longer term issues, family governance. They're asking questions about family constitutions, setting up family councils and owners councils. We have many families that are going through significant transitions where family office development rises to the top of their concerns. So the bottom line is that we're seeing families wanting to use this particular time when things have slowed down to build or fix their relationships, improve their decision-making structures.
Yeah, I love that you laid that out so thoughtfully. I mean, those are all great and important topic areas. And I will say that I have read Doug's book and it really is fantastic and helpful and something where it does create an opportunity for shared language and practices within a family. So I'll make a plug for that, Doug, because it's a really fantastic book. Nicole, I'm going to pop down to you and kind of check in around from a prioritization standpoint, what you're seeing.
Yeah, so I think Doug said it really well. I mean, we're finding that clients are really proactively taking the time to dig deep and dig into things that maybe aren't so comfortable or that need more input from various family members that have historically been pushed off and just been more long range projects. And so just really taking the time, energy, and attention to look at it. A lot of our clients come to us because we don't offer investment advice. We're not a registered investment advisory firm. We just sit on the same side of the table as the clients and make sure that they have all the tools and resources and strategic decision-making power that they need to be able to move forward and make a good decision for themselves now and their legacy into the future. So I think, for those clients, the reality that at some point they might not be able to serve in that lead CIO role for their family anymore has been kind of a stark realization. And so going out and really finding the appropriate successor CIOs has become very relevant, worthy of the family's time, and not just one family member's time, not just the patriarch's time or the matriarch's time or the lead brother or, whoever it is that's kind of spearheading that role, but really engaging all members of the family, sitting down, thinking, like Doug said, about, governance policies and stuff, but also formation of finance councils, embracing the formality around all of that, refining the family IPS, getting all parties to sign off. So it's not just dad's vision of what the allocation should be any longer. It's really looking at it more holistically for all of the various family members. And I think pulling these family members into these discovery meetings has really empowered them to find the right personality, capabilities, and fit for their family now and into the future. And also saying, will one firm cut it, or should we be looking at multiple different resources to segment out, various aspects of the portfolio? So I think that's been something that we've seen as, kind of elevate up within our client base. But also to kind of piggyback again on something that Doug said is we've seen clients really want that runway for proper education and involvement of the next generation, looking at next generation charitable giving initiatives, supporting the voice of the junior members of the family and so forth, and really empowering other members of the family. I think that's been, for me, I think a very enriching theme that we've seen kind of come out of the last few years.
Yeah, I would definitely say I've seen the same, and people really, like you said, with accessibility and virtual opportunities of connection and education and facilitated dialogue. I think people have been able to collaborate in that way more efficiently. So that's been a real positive. Lisa, how about for you? What's the prioritization you're seeing within your client base?
Initially, I saw a lot of crisis intervention as a priority. The mental health issues that have come up out of the pandemic have been so significant. And it was very difficult in the pre-vaccination days because it was difficult to get somebody into a good hospital bed, a good placement. Even the very high caliber placements were full and there were very stringent requirements. It was a difficult landscape. I handled a lot of guardianship and conservatorship matters where I needed to do crisis intervention and get a decision maker appointed for somebody, either for personal decision making or for financial decision making, or to get somebody into a psychiatric hospital or even a medical psychiatric setting or a treatment recovery setting, and also to get people out. So I did a lot of that in a crisis intervention mode initially, especially the set of people, young adults who were between about age 25 and age 35. It was that set that were really struggling with this initially. It's the set that either was about to launch or had launched and stumbled backwards because of addiction or because of mental health issues, and isolation and loneliness at a time when we should be launching was a great struggle for families. So that was initially what I saw. What I'm seeing now is planning for incapacity. It's very interesting now that we've been in the long term of this, a longer trajectory, and people are looking down the runway, not really sure what they're looking at in the future, but wanting to do some planning. Mm-hmm. I'm finding that my family clients are thinking about incentive trusts and conservatorships that are proactive and that don't turn on a finding of incapacity. They're not an undignified kind of deprivation of rights. Instead of that, this is more promoting self-dignity of their young adult children, offspring, to make sure that they have solutions with incentive trusts, so that as people are launching, these young adults will hit certain milestones and meet those milestones and be incentivized to do that. And if there's a stumble, there's a conservatorship in place that will spring into effect. And that's what I'm seeing is more of the planning for this rather than the crisis intervention around it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing kind of in all of you is, people's kind of openness to being proactive and thoughtful and really informed and educated about the variety of things that could come up. And if they do come up, how to kind of plan accordingly, or at least know who to reach out to have that discussion with. That's fantastic. And thinking about the theme of challenges, we wanted to kind of check in about where have you or a client been really challenged, and how did you overcome that? I think maybe an example, again, either on a situation that you've bumped into as someone providing a service or something that your client has bumped into. Nicole, do you have anything that comes to mind on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge of the last couple of years is turning back the hands of time on a daily basis, right? We all wish we had like 3 or 4 more hours. And I think our industry has just seen tremendous growth, because of the fact that families are pausing and, and pivoting and deciding that they need the additional help and support. They're seeking out resources, right? So, it's great that, those of us on this panel and those in the audience, I'm sure have been highly sought after over the last few years. But I think more practically, if I think about some challenges. I think the overabundance of considerations with respect to the proposed tax reform changes definitely put a lot of pressure on, my industry in particular over the course of the last year, and the urgency of to act, not to act. So that was a big part of what we were doing. So for instance, working with attorneys to act fast to draft documents, but then determine whether or not we could hold them for a proper kind of cooling off period between the creation and funding of an LLC to when we were going to actually conduct the valuation and sell the interest to a GST trust, for instance. In that instance, luckily we were able to turn the calendar year, which is always sort of ideal. So, you're kind of waiting with bated breath, wondering like, when is the ball going to drop? So I think that's been where I've seen a lot of challenges come forth. And it's just challenging for families, in general, because these are hard decisions for them to make and they don't make them lightly. And when you're kind of starting and stopping and going in fits and, there's all these various variables, I think, it can sometimes become overwhelming. But on another topic that I think really rings true that I've seen in a few different client situations is the establishment of kind of safety and exit plans from the US, particularly because of what Doug referred to earlier, kind of the unknown future state of the political landscape. So we've seen some increased attention there. And this is kind of all in the vein of the idea of seeking asylum for asset protection with a lens of like FX and geographic diversification. And every case is so nuanced and so specific, and every jurisdiction and tax regime is so different and so nuanced. So it just takes a lot of time and energy to navigate those waters to come up with the right decisions for the families.
Are there some key questions that you like, and I'm looking just, at the folks on the call, where if this is something how could they approach getting curious about this, or what could they start to listen for if this is something you sense a client might be interested in?
So I'll kick that off, I guess. But I think for some clients who are kind of thinking about this, things that I've heard are contemplating jurisdictions predominantly that are English speaking and that may have the same or similar type of climate or feel to where they currently reside in the US, kind of an area that they're a situation that they're comfortable with. When some people think of certain areas in Europe, they think, oh, that's so far outside of where we live today. And I don't know if my family would be comfortable with that, if we had to go there for a couple of years. So those kinds of considerations I think have been really relevant. How difficult is it to get a passport in these jurisdictions and the timing of that process, and really identifying and locating sage tax and legal counsel with deep experience in these jurisdictions so that you just make sure that you don't accidentally sidestep another part of your huge estate planning process, I think is critically important. Making sure that you have the right asset protection in place. And then as well, I mean, this is totally, I'm going to get to Lisa next on this, but I think thinking through the flexibility or lack thereof, if trusts are created in these jurisdictions and the family decides at some point in the future, what, this place isn't the right place for me. Can I reposition this trust into a different jurisdiction or not? Am I kind of stuck here? So I think all of these things have been incredibly relevant points and points that we've been navigating the waters of.
Yeah. Yeah, Lisa, did you want to have any comment on that? I know.
Sure. So, it's a perfect segue from what Nicole just said. I noticed 3 significant challenges. One of them, as Nicole mentioned, is that we're watching the political landscape. And towards the very end of 2021, we were watching that political landscape. It was really in motion and the ground felt like jello. We did a lot of legacy planning by creating trusts that we kept what I would call shelf ready. They were shelf stable, they were on the shelf, and we didn't fund them. So I hear what Nicole is saying, and we've got to talk after this because, we probably have a lot to share, a lot about, how you create these very protective structures, keep them on the shelf, get the funding mechanism ready. You sell this, you get this all ready, but you don't actually fund it until you know that the moment is right. And so we did a lot of that. That was a great challenge for several of my clients. The other challenge that I saw was going back to Nicole's conversation initially about mortality and about how the past 2 years have created this sense of mortality that has infiltrated marriages. So there are marriages where people have been in significant long-term marriages and have experienced ennui, They've experienced a listlessness, sort of this quieting of romance and a glide and a coast that lacks romance and it lacks luster. And there have been a lot of clients who've come to me who have said, you know, this pandemic shook me out of that state, and I'm now looking to get divorced. These are midlife, wealthy, gray divorces. They're called gray divorces because it's midlife, gray or not, but they are midlife wealthy divorce, where the divorce includes legacy planning. It includes protection of significant assets, unwinding and disentangling sophisticated, complex asset structures and income structures. At a time in life that's very unique. The kids have left the nest. People are going to be alone. There may be grandchildren in the picture. It's a whole different situation, and it calls for an elegant approach. It calls for a non-acrimonious approach, an approach that where counsel will speak with opposing counsel and make some ground rules about bringing the couple through without tainting a long-term marriage and without upsetting the family and without creating disharmony and disruption and destabilization to complex, sophisticated asset structures. It takes a certain personality. And it takes a certain process. The process means not being in a courthouse. We don't want to be in a courthouse anyway. We want to keep things private and confidential. We don't want the public to know what's going on. These are families of significant wealth, and we don't want this aired, especially when there's business interests or real estate interests. We don't want the world to know. So we have the opportunity now to have hearings by Zoom. We have the opportunity to mediate like we've never had the opportunity before. It's been new and it's been much more vibrant and robust. So we've been mediating and bringing agreements to court by Zoom, ensuring privacy, reducing disclosure, reducing a disclosure to the public, reducing acrimony, and keeping the process as elegant as possible. So that's been a challenge, but it has been a great opportunity. And then the third impact that I've seen that has been a challenge is business succession. This has been a difficult time for the generation that had planned for succession to actually turn it over. The pandemic created a new set of issues that sometimes the matriarch and patriarch were never planning for, and that the younger generation has been able to accommodate and pivot through, in part because of technology, in part because of the way that our entire industrial sector has changed, where we have individual workers more so than ever. We've seen a lot of business pivots. Bye-bye to the warehouse, hello to the workers who come and deliver. It's a whole new situation. And so business succession has been a challenge for the generations, as I've seen it, especially in a landscape of potential diminished capacity and illness. So that has been a great challenge. It's involved a lot of conservatorship and trust planning to help families make that business succession plan at a difficult time.
Yeah. Wow, what great points, Lisa. And I think, kind of like you immediately jumped in and said, Nicole, we need to talk. I really sense the essence of collaboration amongst your team and amongst your advisors, as well as being proactive in reaching out and having that kind of what if dialogue can be really helpful. Doug, this segues right over to you. I can tell a ton of these topics touch areas that you play a role in as well. So from on the side of challenges, whether it's something that you've experienced or supported your client through, could you share, some insight with us there?
Sure. I think the pandemic and the last 2 years, they've impacted the urgencies, but the basic issues that families need to address, they're very, from my perspective, haven't changed all that much, and the array of potential solutions, haven't really changed. What's really changed is the process by which we engage with our clients, certainly during lockdown where you couldn't have any on-site. So basically, while the engagement has generally improved with individual family members through video, Much of our work is with family groups, small family groups, and their businesses. Delivering a presentation of information like a PowerPoint to a family group is one thing, and that's been helped by this acceptance of video. But facilitation of a small family meeting about highly emotional issues has been something we've had to figure out in this new world. Those meetings require a lot more planning and preparation, because we really can't read body language over video, and we can't physically move around the room like we used to as needed. We used to, for example, carefully plan out, for example, the seating arrangement where people in the room will sit. And that's a part of our process. We can't do that with everybody on Zoom individually. We can't walk around the business and get a feel for the culture of the business, the structure of the business, the performance of individuals, in the moment. This has caused us to have to ask a lot more questions, have a lot more individual and smaller group meetings. So I'd say for us and for the clients, the challenges have been in the process of doing the work we do, not necessarily in the solutions or the underlying issues that clients have faced. And I'd say the challenges lie in the fact that, well, you'd expect that video and remote working adds the efficiency of the work that we do, and working remotely saves time, you don't travel. But in actuality, what we found is because it takes so much more time to have those smaller group meetings with emotional content, it takes a lot more time to do the work we do with families, not less.
Yeah. And it sounds like you said being a lot more thoughtful and maybe depthful in like the kind of initial sourcing and conversations, to get people really ready to come together where it could be.
Yeah, we have to do planning. Before we would show up at, we of course plan out our series of interviews and data gathering, but prepping for a Zoom call actually is harder.
Yeah. Is there any kind of tips that you would offer to people on the Zoom today who are going to be stepping into a group conversation that could potentially have some triggering topics, or how to be more mindful of like the kind of dynamics via Zoom?
Sure. First of all, over prepare. Before you have that small group meeting, have individual meetings. Make sure everybody is prepared for not only what is expected, set expectations, but what can go wrong. What if, the father says, steps on that landmine by accident? How are we going to save this call and get you, the client, one of the clients, to the goal of this call? So preparation is key. For families that have, somebody that typically blows up meetings, the Zoom can actually be your friend because it has a mute button. So whereas before we could get up and go over to the person, put our hand on their shoulder and say, we agreed to some ground rules for this meeting. We still have to have those ground rules in place. So another tip is have ground rules for a meeting.
Yes.
And have consequences. Use the mute button when you need to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think being proactive and, as you said, having conversation about, what if things happen, what's the worst, what's the best, and really kind of scenarioing out different things so people can get ready to be present for, the dynamic conversations that can sometimes happen when you bring a group of people with different and similar opinions together. So, yeah.
Invite the participants to help create the ground rules together.
Yes. Yeah. Everybody
So they buy in.
Yeah, I would say that's a major one too. And maybe even having them in the chat or posted so you can kind of reference back to them. They can kind of form some slightly objective but collaborative criteria for really, guiding people in the conversation.
And another advantage is you can privately chat as long as it's not recorded, because when you record, and then you play back, some of those chats, I believe, can be exposed.
Oh, okay.
But imagine you're in a physical room with a family and you want to whisper into the ear of somebody, to watch how they're expressing themselves or whatever, you can actually do that with Zoom. You can send a private confidential chat if somebody's sort of taking the conversation in an unhelpful place.
Yeah.
So there are some advantages to using this technology.
I would agree with that. And I say one kind of additive there would be just to design that again with the folks on the call. So hey, I may reach out to you, or if I notice these things, I may send you a message, or you may notice this, and just to create some comfort with how you might interject or kind of bring the conversation back on track. So you're trying to reduce the surprise there. And having, like you said, someone like yourself, Doug, or any of the folks on this call participate in those conversations to really act as that neutral third party and someone that can, again, help, as you said, move things forward.
Yeah. And if you're lucky to work with a partner in your work, we typically work in teams of 2 or sometimes more. You can use the chat or offline on your phone to send messages to each other to have that backdoor conversation in the moment when you're facilitating those meetings. That's something you can't do live. So those are advantages.
Yeah. Well, speaking of advantages and lessons learned, as we kind of get to this final question before we lean into some Q&A, in a more broad sense, what lessons have you learned that you're really going to carry forward to provide really the best service, or how would you redefine that, or what are you pulling forward? Lisa, I'll start with you.
Sure. So, I again, a perfect segue from what Doug was saying. I think that Zoom and the other technologies have changed the way that we work. It's changed the way that I practice law. My clients used to want to meet in person, and now we're all so comfortable with Zoom that we do have our client meetings often by Zoom, sometimes in person. But what used to feel very natural in driving into the city, parking, and meeting feels now like a bit of a hassle, and Zoom is so much easier and so much more private. Nobody has to see anybody. You can be in the comfort of your own home. As Doug mentioned, you can have private side conversations, and there can also be a more fruitful engagement because people have a slight bit of distance. They're not right in front of each other. And so it frees people up in some cases to be even more honest and to go out on the ledge and say what they really mean to say because they're at home, and it feels to some people safer. So that has happened. In the legal industry, we immediately shifted right over to remote notarizations. We shifted right over to court by Zoom, mediation by Zoom. And that has worked out very well. We now have court in person too, and I like both. One of the differences that when you're in court, you're wearing a mask, and I think mouths and faces are so important when we're being expressive in front of a judge. So in some ways, the Zoom hearing is more effective and impactful, especially not only for me as a person arguing a case to the judge as the litigator, but for the judge. How's the judge going to assess credibility of a witness behind a mask? How's the judge going to see the emotion behind the case? And so by Zoom, it's actually facilitated, and it creates privacy. My clients want privacy. And when you have proceedings, whether they are meetings, whether they are mediations, whether they're arbitrations or court, whatever it is, the privacy matters. And so it's been working very well. The other advantage, another pandemic adapted solution that's been working very well, also leading and keying off of what Doug said, is that you can have a more holistic meeting. If you do your preparation in advance and you have a few phone calls in advance with the different participants, then you can bring many people together in an audio visual meeting, whether it's Zoom or another platform, where you have many advisors advising and you've got many people at the table. It's much easier than bringing people in across continent and trying to bring people to the same time and place. You just simply click on your Zoom and you've got everybody together. And with advanced preparation by all the participants, you can have a significantly robust meeting. So that has been one wonderful thing that's come out of the pandemic in law and the way that we help families to get through difficult family and fiduciary issues.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, I think the prep is so key. And I would say anybody kind of on the call, if you're thinking about prep, I always say encourage, ask your colleagues, ask anybody on this call, but doing that kind of initial inquiry prior to the dialogue or bringing people together, I've personally, has been exceptionally helpful. Nicole, how about for you in terms of just things you want to pull forward, lessons learned?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, slightly unlike Lisa and Doug, we actually had done most of our conversations and communications with clients with phone and Zoom over the years prior to the pandemic even. So, we're happy to get together with clients when they want to, but we never kind of adapted a practice where we had to physically sit in front of them, once a month or once a quarter just to kind of check that off the calendar. I think it's always been really deliberate in interactions and engagement, and we engage with our clients, most of our clients, I mean, very frequently, sometimes multiple times a day, depending on workflows that are currently occurring. So, for me, I think things that I want to pull forward are probably best practices that we've always been doing, but that have really been reinforced through the situation that we've experienced in the last few years. And I think one of those things is how critical an expert lens is for clients to have full visibility into what they're deciding upon, again, for themselves and for their family, for the legacy that they're going to leave behind. I previously mentioned a search for a successor CIO. And, before that process started, there was a tremendous amount of due diligence that went into it to not only vet the companies that we were, putting forward to the family, but the culture within those companies, the approach, the staffing, looking at historical back-tested returns and being able to compare that to the returns the family CIO has been able to, attain in history. Also looking at the backgrounds of lead managers, if they left firms and it was under a contentious situation, why did they leave? What happened? Were they involved in that? Because at the end of the day, I think, we're being heavily leaned on in this respect. And there's so much significant time put into these searches, but the family can't allow us to be complacent. We have to really stay on our toes in all of these situations and make sure that we're putting our best foot forward and we're putting the best resources forward for them. And so I think that's been highlighted in some of these situations where we've had to go out and seek new advisors or turn over some different individuals who were part of that client's life for many years prior to them attaining a significant amount of wealth. And now their circumstances have changed so significantly. And that sole practitioner or that, attorney might not be able to actually be capable of handling some of the complex matters that they're working through today. And so as circumstances change, sometimes, we need to kind of take a look inside of the current advisors that are in place and make sure that we have all the right players, or if additional players need to be added to the team. And so I think rethinking best practices more frequently has been just a recurring theme. And I know how much is enough is a question that's always asked in our industry. And I think, looking internally at a situation that we had, a patriarch felt pretty good about how it had been transferred to G2 and G3, but it really bothered him that there was remaining lifetime exemption. And in light of some of the changes that may have come down the pike, he really wanted to make sure that he fully utilized that, whereas his wife was absolutely not interested in any additional planning. And so kind of navigating those conversations in the right way. And in that situation, we're deeply involved with the rest of the family. So we were able to go to G2 and see, what do you want to do? What is the right thing? And G2 said, we don't want any more money. We're good. So we worked with them to create a G1 trust for the benefit of G3 and beyond. And so they were part of that and part of that drafting process with the attorney to make sure that, what they felt was represented within those documents. And I'll also say, along those same lines, kind of the concept of equal versus fair. We had an equalization exercise with a family that came to mind. It took months to navigate because we heard and respected and took feedback from every family member involved. And I think these conversations take great care to navigate. I mean, this is something that myself, Lisa, Doug, we're doing all the time, and you, Samantha, especially in your line of work, doing mediation and working with individuals. So I think when you're engaged and kind of in some situations, when you're engaged daily with some family members, but not necessarily with other family members. You don't want the family looking at you and saying, who are you working for? You want them to know that you're there to help and support the family in its entirety. And so I think, just continue to use the white glove approach. Take the time to listen, be mindful, and I think pick up on cues and clues too when people might need support within the family. I know Lisa mentioned mental health, and Samantha, you and I have had a number of conversations where there's been some tension amongst families, and kind of feathers have been ruffled and saying, when do we need to bring someone like Samantha in to have dialogue and discussions with certain family members so that they feel heard, they have the support that they need. And so, especially when you kind of have, different generations or in-laws, and the kind of thing, rubbing up against each other, which I'm sure Lisa, deals with kind of all the time. So I think, continuing to bring all those best practices that we probably just always do forward, but I think it's become ever so prevalent in the last few years just because of the impact, the negative impact that all of this has had on families and the fact that they need to be cared for, gently, I guess.
Yeah. Nicole, so many good points. And I think one of the main things, like you said, is that, and I think you do really thoughtfully, is constantly reflecting about what's resonating with your clients and paying attention to the impact of your best practices and how, you said to maintain them, elevate them, expand them into different parts of your full client, which may be more than just matriarch, patriarch, and really, again, make sure everybody's heard in the right way, in the right frame, and that can shift as different scenarios come up. So I think you're very thoughtful about that. Doug, in terms of lessons you're pulling forward, and then I'll try and save room. If anyone has a question, please put it in the chat now. And after Doug wraps, I'll put it to the audience. And if for some reason we don't get time today, we still want to take those questions and follow up with you and make sure that we're thoughtful in that. So feel free to put them in the chat too.
Yeah, really quickly, so we have some time for questions. I think it's obvious we've all learned how to use video and work remotely a lot better. But for me and folks in my company, we've also gained an appreciation of how better to work on site, because we have gone back to the field. We're now working with families on site again, except we're taking a break for Omicron. But we now can laser focus on the things that work better on site. So we don't have as many on-site meetings with families like that. In most cases, if they're high conflict, maybe not. But we can really tailor on-site versus remote to what the client wants. We can be more flexible because we know why we need to be on site, and we can laser focus on being efficient when we're in the field.
Yeah.
Oh, and I also say it's not only video. Families they've also integrated the other platforms like Calendly and Doodle Poll. So it used to be a struggle trying to get folks to schedule, and now they do this privately. They do this for their own family meetings.
Yeah, I think again, like a nice, like you said, unifying theme of just being reflective and thoughtful about what you're learning, and then what's the best kind of process or practice that you can implement, and then getting feedback on that again. How did that work for you? And like you said, staying in dialogue with people about the impact. I just checked. I don't see any questions coming through. If there's anything, please feel free to send them. And as people are thinking or things might come in, as we kind of come to a close, Lisa, I know you're going to close us out, but, Nicole or Doug, before I pass it over to Lisa to kind of, close us out here, is there anything else you just want to add in or mention or share before we wrap up?
I'd like to make a comment. So we've seen level of conflict in families because they've been together for a long time now, probably higher than we've seen before. But one interesting fact is there's more of an appreciation of that family bond. So people have more interest in getting to the other side of a conflict. So I think that's an important thing that many families have learned from the pandemic, that family matters. More than they thought.
Yeah, and I think people being able to reach out and resource themselves more thoughtfully and I would say proactively in terms of, if we're going to be in this situation, how can we best navigate, living together, working together, being together, all together at the same time again, which for some families I know who have had, folks coming back who has, had time away. Again, I think it's about, as you said, being intentional around how to live and work together in the new construct environmentally that you are. And so that's important. I don't see anything coming through right now. So if anyone, if you're watching this later, you have questions that come up or want one of us to comment on anything in more in depth, please let us know. Lisa, thank you again for putting this together and just, bringing people together for a great conversation. You're so thoughtful in that. And I will pass it back over to you to kind of close us out. And everyone, thank you so much for your great answers. I feel like every time I'm in anyone's company here, I learn a lot. So I'm grateful for the time.
I learned from all of you, and thank you for moderating us with such wonderful questions and keeping it moving so well. The way that you moved this along also speaks to the way that we need to move communications with our clients. We've seen exhaustion from the technologies, although it's been so good for us when we think about refining the way we work and redesigning the way we work and the way that we help people. We need to remember that the technologies actually can be exhausting and that we need to keep things moving fairly quickly, but make sure that they are robust and meaningful. And right now, we're trying to really enhance engagement with each other. It's not just about what's the only way to meet or the safest way to meet. Now we need to think about what is the most engaged connection that we can try to strive for with our clients, with our colleagues, with our family members, because now we're realizing this is really quite long-term, and the world has really changed in ways that have reverberations forward and may not really revert back to the way it was before. So now we really need to be thinking about redesigning and refining along the lines of engagement and connection, and remembering to use mature and elegant and creative ways to solve problems for our clients. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's Business of Family webinar. This was the 2022 kickoff, and we look forward to coming back with others. If anybody has any questions, I see there's one question in the Q&A box, but before we get there, just so everybody knows, if after we end you have questions, reach out to any of us. We're glad to answer them. And in any event, we will reach out to you just to check in and see if there's any questions. Within the month, we'll reach out to you just to see. So thank you. I'm Lisa Cukier from Burns & Levinson. This has been Business of Family, and I'm turning it right back to Samantha for that last question.
Yes, and well, we might go a little over time, so this will be on the recording. The question was for Nicole. You mentioned clients are contemplating foreign jurisdictions for protection of their assets. What is the prevalence of this type of approach?
So I would say, it's very case specific, but we do currently have a couple of families who are navigating these waters, as I mentioned. So, right now, the biggest thing is determining the right jurisdiction for the family. And there's a lot of thought and patience that has to go into that process. But, at this point in time, I think it's becoming maybe slightly more prevalent than I've ever seen in the past. And with that, we're not talking about pushing a substantial amount of assets somewhere. We're talking about putting enough assets to really sustain a family for a few years, maybe, so it could be the tune to starting with, 5, 10 million, something like that, for families who are worth, substantially more than that, in the hundreds of millions, billions dollars range. So it's really kind of them looking for that safety net relief valve, somewhere that they can go, that if there is substantial turmoil in the US, they kind of have that safe haven. And also looking at a jurisdiction that's not directly paired with the US. So if we have a huge, devastation within our markets here, perhaps finding safety elsewhere. So, but I would say that it's not something that I saw much of in years prior.
Yeah, and to piggyback just a little bit, Nicole, you and I have had some discussions about this, but you have said, talk to experts and get opinions and make sure that those people talk to each other. I know Nicole has been exceptionally proactive in seeking out resources for her clients to really have meaningful dialogue around how to make that decision in a very informed and thoughtful way. So that's just something I would add on as you and I have had some discussions. And yes, thank you for that question. And if anything else, we'll reach back out to you. And again, wishing everybody a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.